You probably think the company that knows the most about you is Google. It makes sense. Every search you make, every video you watch, every place you look up on maps slowly builds a picture of your life. Not a full one, but enough to feel like there's a digital outline of you sitting somewhere in the background. A few years ago, a California privacy lawyer decided to test what companies actually hold on him. His name was Nick Burke. He wasn't a public figure, and he wasn't investigating anything specific. He was just curious about what would happen if he used a new privacy law that let people request the personal data companies store about them. So he sent a few requests out to different companies. Most replies were simple: basic account summaries, standard data exports, nothing unusual. One response didn't fit that pattern. A company called Axiom sent him back a file that was 22 pages long. Nick had never signed up for Axiom, never created an account, never knowingly interacted with them at all. But the document they sent didn't look like a mistake or a glitch in a system. It looked structured, like a profile built over time. And the first strange thing wasn't the size of it, it was how much of it felt like it already knew him. The file starts with what seems normal at first glance: names, addresses, contact details, old locations he had lived in years ago, phone numbers that weren't all active anymore, email variations that had been used across different periods of his life. Then it starts connecting them. Different pieces of information appear grouped together in ways that suggest multiple sources feeding into the same identity. Then it shifts again. The document stops behaving like a simple record and starts behaving like a description. Estimated income ranges, household structure, education level, lifestyle indicators, likely interests based on behavioral patterns, not presented as facts, but as calculated probabilities. Some of it matches reality closely, some of it is noticeably off, and sometimes both exist side by side in the same category without any explanation for how confident any of it actually is. At one point, it assigns spending ranges for categories like clothing, entertainment, and personal expenses. In another section, it assigns likelihoods to traits and behaviors as if they can be mapped numerically. And then there are the parts that feel strangely specific while still being wrong: family details that don't match his actual situation, labels that don't align with his background, assumptions that look precise on paper but collapse under real world context. Still, the overall impression isn't confusion, it's completeness. To understand how something like this exists, you have to go back long before the internet became what it is today. Axiom didn't start as a tech company. In 1969, it began in Arkansas as a business built around mailing lists. At the time, companies were trying to solve a simple problem: how do you send advertisements to the right households without wasting money on everyone else? The solution was basic: sort names, sort addresses, group people into categories that made targeting more efficient. That was the beginning. Over time, those lists stopped being just lists. More information got added, more sources were connected. What started as postal data slowly turned into structured consumer profiles built from many different inputs. By the time digital systems arrived, the foundation was already in place. And by the early 2000s, Axiom had grown into one of the largest consumer data companies in the world, with profiles tied to hundreds of millions of people. Not because it tracked individuals directly like a social media platform, but because it didn't need to. Think of it less like surveillance and more like reconstruction. Every company you interact with holds a small fragment of your identity. A store knows what you bought, a delivery service knows where it went, a website knows what you clicked on, public records know where you live, what property is tied to your name, and basic legal details that are accessible by design. On their own, none of these pieces reveal much, but when they're combined, they start forming something that looks surprisingly complete. That's the system Axiom is built on. It collects fragments from hundreds of sources and aligns them under a single identity, not always perfectly, but consistently enough to be useful. Even when direct information is missing, statistical models fill in gaps. If enough similar profiles show a pattern, the system can estimate things like income range, interests, or household structure. That's where parts of Nick's report come from. Not certainty, but inference built from comparison, which is why the document doesn't just describe a person, it also predicts one. Axiom isn't operating alone. It exists inside a wider network, often referred to as the data broker industry, a collection of companies that gather, purchase, and trade consumer information, then package it into profiles used for advertising, analytics, and risk assessment. Some of these companies are visible in financial or credit systems. Others sit quietly in the background of advertising infrastructure, never directly interacting with the people they profile. The flow of information between them is constant. One company collects it, another refines it, another sells it onward. Over time, the original source of a data point becomes almost impossible to trace. What remains is a consolidated profile that feels unified, even though it was built from scattered origins. Privacy laws, like California's CCPA and Europe's GDPR, have started forcing some visibility into this system. They require companies like Axiom to respond when people request access to their data. In some cases, that means downloadable reports. In others, online portals where users can view what has been collected about them. But access doesn't always mean control. Some companies don't fully erase data, instead, marking it as suppressed. Others may still receive the same underlying information through partner networks, and outside major regions, rules can be inconsistent or minimal, which is why Nick's report stands out. Not because it's unusual, but because it's one of the rare moments where a normally invisible system becomes readable. What stays with you after seeing it isn't just the amount of information, it's how ordinary the process behind it actually is. Nothing about it comes from a single dramatic event. There's no breach, no single database, no moment where everything is collected at once. It's built slowly through everyday interactions that don't feel significant on their own. A purchase here, a form filled out there, a record updated somewhere else, small signals that gradually accumulate into something much larger. And once you see that pattern, the question changes. It's no longer just about Axiom, it's about how many other systems are quietly building versions of the same thing without ever putting a name on the front of the file. If you enjoyed this investigation, consider subscribing. There are a lot more systems like this operating in the background of everyday life, and most of them only become visible when you start following the right questions.